7:01, and we have about 60 people here with us tonight, as far as I can tell from a quick count. So I'm going to do some housekeeping, I guess, and then move you over to the headliner for tonight, who isn't the person you think it might be. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Good evening again for those who hadn't joined when I said hello. My name is Andrew Kekach, and I'm the Executive Director at Nova Scotia Woodlot Owners and Operators Association. I'm not a big fan of pro forma statements on reconciliation, but I want to personally acknowledge how fortunate I feel to be here in Mi'kma'ki, the traditional and unceded homeland of the Mi'kmaq people. And I also want to say that in my personal view, the Mi'kmaq have not been treated generally with the fairness and respect that is inherently due to all human beings and all Canadians, and I make a personal commitment to try to change that going forward. Thank you. So this is the 6th, I believe, in a series of workshops and webinars on ecological forestry. It is generally funded by the Nova Scotia Department of Natural Resources and Renewables, and we're very grateful for that. The program, however, is entirely developed by NSWOA, and all credit or blame ultimately comes to me, I guess. So feel free to complain if the spirit moves you. Praise is also welcome. Our next webinar will be March 28th. That's also a Tuesday at 7 p.m. And it will be on, I'm afraid to say who will give it, given what happened for tonight. It will be on working with forest professionals. For those of you who want to take the next step and move from thinking about forest restoration after a hurricane to actually getting some work done, this is probably a very useful thing to sit in on. And the events page at nswooa.ca, that's nswooa.ca events page, will tell you about other events that we may have coming up going forward. Housekeeping for right now. We'll do questions at the very end. You're welcome to put your questions in chat now if that's easier for you so you don't forget them. Automatically muting attendees, it just makes it a little easier because we all forget occasionally to turn back our mics, and we either hear spaghetti boiling or a hockey game on somewhere, so we'll try to minimize that. Let's see, we talked about questions. Closed captioning is on for those who may need it. If it gets too hilarious, and you know that it sometimes does, we may turn it off, but anyway, we'll see how it goes. It's often more fun than useful, but we'll see. And we are recording the webinar, and it will be available for future viewing. I'm not sure when or exactly how we're going to post it, but we'll send out an email letting you know. Because of the circumstances of tonight's presentation, if there are a lot of questions, we may schedule a follow-up Q&A with Ryan Dickey. Ryan, unfortunately, will not be here tonight. Ryan is suffering from strep throat and can't speak. So Ryan's colleague, Daniel Hart, will sit in his stead, and you're in very good hands. Actually, we'll move right on, and we'll let Daniel introduce himself. He comes to us from Wallace, Nova Scotia, which is the longtime home of his wife's family, arriving here, about 6 months ago now, Daniel, from Alberta. And he'll tell you more about his career. Thank you again for being here. Put your questions in chat or wait till the end, and we hope that you find this useful and entertaining. Daniel.
Thank you for the introduction, Andy. As Andy was saying, I am not Ryan Dickey. My name is Daniel Hart. Just to provide you a little bit of history about myself, I am a forest technician, one of the 2 extension foresters working for the Family Forest Network of Nova Scotia, the other one being Ryan Dickey, who did create this presentation. With that, there may be some questions that are brought up that I currently do not have the answer to or the information in front of me to address. So as Andy had stated, we may do a Q&A session at a later date involving Ryan Dickey, as he was the one who did put this together. But I will do my best to present the information he has gathered here. And should you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. So the purpose of this presentation is hurricane restoration in the Wabanaki Forest. It's important to understand that what we are going to present here is not about right or wrong ways to salvage or restore. It's what we are trying to present here is a more ecological way to actually do those things. So what we will be covering within this presentation will be the history and future of hurricanes in Nova Scotia, the immediate impact of Fiona, salvage or leave it be, ecological salvage methods, and post-salvage silviculture. Fiona made landfall in Nova Scotia early on September 24th, and though it was downgraded to a post-tropical storm, it still had the power of a Category 2 hurricane with a barometric pressure of 932.7 millibars. And peak wind gusts of nearly 180 kilometers per hour. It was one of the strongest storms to ever impact our province. By the time it had subsided, there was widespread damage to our forests and coastlines, storm cleanup to our forests, and the costliest storm cleanup in Nova Scotia history. Its effects on our forests will be felt for decades to come. It's also important to understand that climate change will bring all types of severe weather impacts, and we will likely see more invasive species as well as an uptick in insect damage and potentially wildfire and more intense storms. So even though this does speak towards Hurricane Fiona, it will apply to multiple situations. So the future of storms in Nova Scotia. Recently, the government of Nova Scotia put forward a document called Weathering What's Ahead, which was a risk assessment on the climate change modules currently being assessed. This risk assessment told us that we are likely to see an increase in storm activity as the waters will get warmer, allowing stronger storms to make their way north and make landfall in Nova Scotia. By the year 2100, we're likely to see an increase of 3.7 to 7 kilometer an hour winds. We will also see less snow, higher chances of drought, which will also provide larger opportunities for things such as insect infestation, as well as larger opportunities for things such as wildfire or large-scale damage from hurricanes. And since Hurricane Fiona, it's also important to note that we have already had 3 separate wind events of winds that were over 100 kilometers per hour. So after Fiona, Ryan has categorized it as 3 separate damage classes. So there's severe damage, which would be greater than 50% damage over a large area. This damage is most common in simplified forests. What we mean by simplified forests are generally low diversity, so monoculture or low species variations, as well as an even aged or even height stand. This damage generally creates the largest loss in investment in growing timber. The photo itself is from Mount Thompson. It was a commercially thinned softwood plantation on Crown land. Moderate damage mimics generally, mimics it similar to irregular shelterwood harvests. Moderate damage is what ecological forestry tries to mimic in itself. We try to promote forest practices that would resemble something similar to the picture you are seeing here, where there are small pockets taken out to resemble a wildfire, to resemble a hurricane or wind damage, or to resemble an insect infestation. The reason for this is we have learned that the environment has been has been taking care of the forest for multiple years. Human intervention has created a degraded forest due to selective logging and poor regeneration practices. By promoting ecological forestry and mimicking natural disturbances, we hope to restore the forest to a point more similar to what would be natural to the Wabanaki area or Wabanaki forest structure. There's also minor damage. So this covers small groups or single trees that were affected from wind throw. Ryan has noted that these can be the most difficult to plan for ecological salvage. The reason for that is generally you have to cut more standing timber than what would normally be salvaged after a wind throw event. So these areas where you do have minor damage, they may be the best to actually leave for coarse woody material. So there are multiple tools that we can utilize to better assess the damage created throughout individual woodlots or over large scale areas. One of the first things you should do is contact a forestry professional and find one that shares your values. This is your woodlot, so it is important that the person doing the work or doing the assessment shares your values and tries to promote what it is that you want done with your land. So the picture here is of satellite imagery provided through NSDNR of post-Hurricane Fiona damage to the wooded areas throughout Nova Scotia. It is difficult to assess small areas through this imagery, so we can also utilize drone imagery. So Brian has provided an example of the satellite imagery here. This is at the Otter Ponds Demonstration Forest. So the satellite imagery, Ryan has pointed out that these two locations actually have significant damage, which he has ground proofed. But even through the satellite imagery being zoomed in to its closest extent, it is difficult to see. Whereas if you utilize something like drone imagery, this picture itself was a drone that flew over 300 feet, and then the picture has been zoomed in on, you get a much clearer picture of the damage. In fact, you could probably count all the trees that are on the ground from this picture in itself. So this tool utilizing orthomosaic pictures or utilizing drone imagery can save you a lot of time when trying to assess the damage that has been done to your woodlot or trying to plan harvest or salvage cleanup after a wind throw event or a large disturbance. A few considerations that you should have when planning out your harvest. Timing is important. Sensitive soils need to be operated on when they are frozen or dry. Try to avoid the wetter periods of the year, so during spring melt or during heavy rain events. These can create depressions within the soil, ruts that are generally harder to regenerate as it compacts the soil, and it's much harder for trees and other vegetation for the roots to actually penetrate through. Markets for low-grade wood are poor, and in some stands, salvage harvesting may not be economical. You do have time. There is no rush on planning out your salvage harvest. Wood generally will not lose its quality until this summer of 2023, and your hardwood firewood can keep for years. The rule of thumb out in Alberta when I was working there for a lumber mill was anything past 2 years left in the woods, they would not take it as it had become too degraded. But within that 2 years for softwood or hardwood, the mills were willing to take it as it was still viable timber. You should also try to avoid cutting standing trees. So the trees that you see standing in the background of these pictures should be left standing. These trees provide an important seed source, a wildlife habitat, and they also provide vertical structure. So as the down trees release their seeds and you start getting regeneration up, the standing trees provide a second cohort to the new regenerating forest. Eventually, as the regeneration comes up, these trees could be harvested at a later date, or they may die off, providing more habitat or providing snags, standing deadwood, or may fall over and again support soil health. It is also important to note your buffer and sensitive areas. So the picture that Ryan has provided here is of the wet areas mapping provided through NSDNR. It's important to note that this is a very good tool to utilize. It does a poor job at noting small creeks, vernal pools, or seeps. So it is a good idea to always ground proof what you find within these layers, or have a forest professional come through and assess your land and map out the area, as they would be able to recognize these vernal pools, these protective areas or areas where buffers should be applied, and they can relay that information to you through a document called a forest management plan, as well as provide you with maps of the area. Unless trees pose a risk to safety or infrastructure, consider making stream buffers a no harvest zone. So in this picture here, you can see that there are a bunch of trees that have fallen across a bridge. These would pose a hazard to anyone wanting to utilize this bridge and may have actually damaged the bridge itself. So these trees should be removed. The bridge itself should be assessed and repaired if repairs are needed. Whereas in the lower picture, you can see that there is no bridge, there's no structures, there's no infrastructure that could be damaged potentially from this. Those trees should be left in place, as they provide shaded areas for fish spawning, as well as provide protection to the creek itself. Oftentimes, after a wind event or a large-scale disturbance, the uprooted trees already pose a risk to sedimentation entering the creek. To do further work around that creek only heightens that risk of sedimentation. So in these cases, it is generally best to buffer the creek and leave it alone. That way we aren't depositing soils within the creek and prevent or potentially creating more damage to that creek or further downstream. So retention and coarse woody materials. So in this picture here, you can see there's this snapped over spruce tree. This is actually a good representation of coarse woody material that could be left within your woodlot. You can see there's already heart rot taking place. So the most valuable portion of the tree has already rotted away. The tree itself is roughly 40 centimeters in diameter. So it is a larger scale coarse woody material and provides good habitat for various animals, as well as provides a seed source to further regeneration. It also helps support soil health, as that tree will eventually break away, degrade, and all the nutrients stored within that tree will return to the soil, promoting soil health and further regeneration. Ecological salvage and retention. So this table here is taken from the Crown Land Retention Guide. These should be viewed as the minimum levels of coarse woody material to be left on specific sites. So it depicts the different vegetation types or forest groups, having coastal intolerant hardwood, mixedwood, oldfield, spruce, hemlock, spruce pine, and tolerant hardwood, and then provides you a minimum of coarse woody material volumes that should be left within those areas per hectare. Again, this should be viewed as 33 meters cubed per hectare is a little less than a full trailer load of wood. By simply not cutting the pulpwood found within your woodlot and leaving that to grow into a more merchantable tree, you can generally achieve these numbers just by doing that. So this is a picture of recent blowdown of a large red spruce at the Otter Ponds demonstration forest. This would be a good spot to clean up most of the high value logs and leave the tops and possibly one or two of the larger stems for coarse woody materials. You should also leave leave it unprocessed and try to leave it as natural as possible. It is also important to note that it would be key to have an assessment done. That way the assessment can determine the soil health within your woodlot and where you plan on having these salvage operations take place. Those assessments can provide you with how much coarse woody material should be best left to promote soil nutrients. So a lot of the times, how much coarse woody material should be left would be dependent by your soil and how depleted the soil is within the forest structure. This picture is of blowdown on a private woodlot in the 9 Mile River. The blowdown itself is of hemlocks. They're approximately 40 centimeters in diameter, and they likely came down in Hurricane Juan. The tops and branches are mostly rotten away, but Ryan, who was here and took this picture, did a closer inspection, and he found that there was ample regeneration in their place. The stems are becoming a great habitat for insects and amphibians, and the stems continue to rot. They will become a seedbed for new seedlings. Deadwood is full of nutrients and acts as a sponge, holding on to water even in the driest parts of the summer. That is an important note with climate change and the modules that have been put forward for what is expected for climate change. Drought is a likely outcome of climate change. So trying to retain coarse woody material that can hold on to water longer, like a sponge, provides insects, amphibians, and wildlife an area to get water, even though there is a drought going on. So this picture is of an area approximately 50-year-olds. Excuse me. This is a picture of an approximately 50-year-old stand red spruce. It regenerated after a windstorm blew down portions of the stand. It was partially salvaged, taking the highest quality logs and firewood. Smaller stems and tops were left on site. The pit and mound topography you can see here, which would be these mounds here and throughout. It shows a history of wind disturbance in the area. The mounds themselves create good microsites for regeneration, while the pits help hold moisture in the soil. It should also be noted that this picture here, you can see that there's very little understory, very little regeneration. So this area would actually be good for either a disturbance or a harvest to try and promote a second cohort of trees coming up underneath. What to harvest and what to retain. Studies have shown that in order to retain 90% richness of biodiversity, we need to retain 75% of woody material on site. Maintaining 50% of the material on site will only retain 75% richness. Now, if you're planning out a harvest and you are considering biodiversity and the economics of that harvest, it may be a good choice to high grade the damaged trees. That would be taking the best saw material while leaving the tops, small diameter stems, and the low value products on site. Even the trees in the background here should be left standing. They are a potential seed source. They're a good perch for birds, and they will add vertical structure to the site as it regenerates. This picture itself was taken again at the Otter Ponds demonstration forest, and the trees that you do see standing have already survived Juan, Dorian, Fiona, and there's nothing stating that they will come down in the next hurricane. They may continue standing for many years, providing seed sources and wildlife habitat for a long time to come. This picture is of a salvage harvest that took place after Hurricane Fiona, and it is meant to be an example for good practices that have taken place. So in this salvage harvest, you can see that they have protected the regeneration coming up, trying to plan around existing regeneration. They've left retention of standing snags, as well as coarse woody material. And they have also had minimal ground disturbance, trying to time this away from wetter portions of the year. This harvest actually took place during the winter while the ground was frozen, and they have also left their stumps uprooted. So it's a hazard to try and tip your stumps back down when they have become uprooted, as they could always spring back up unexpectedly. So if you're walking through the forest, personally, I walk through the forest quite a bit, and I would be fairly upset if I was walking along and I had a tree just flip up on me and I went flying someplace. Also, leaving your roots upended like this, it provides an area where those roots once sit it provides a good microsite of suitable nutrient-rich soil that was previously unavailable to seed beds. So trees such as yellow birch look for these areas particularly, as they require it to establish themselves. Harvesting and silviculture planning. So this is a small area wind damage that Ryan had cleaned up about 8 years ago on a private lot. It regenerated very well, as you can see in the picture. Most of the standing trees that they retained are still healthy. And pretty well what he did is he developed a 2-age stand. You can see the trees that they left are your dominant canopy, as well as you have a lot of regeneration coming up in the understory. In a few years, Ryan will likely return to this site and do a PCT or pre-commercial thinning and create more gaps and try and start a third cohort, trying to create 3 age classes within this forest stand. So when hiring a contractor for salvage work, the most important thing to understand is it is your woodlot, it is your land, and harvesting, assessments, harvesting, and whoever you bring onto your land should respect your values. That should be their #1 priority, is try to meet your goals and respect your values. Other things to consider is bring in a forester or forest technician to assess the land, develop a management plan, and create some maps for you of the area. You should clearly outline what your goals are to that forester, should you choose to bring one onto your woodlot, and clearly outline your goals to any contractors you bring on later to do the harvest or salvage operations. It is important to put a contract in place, as this will hold all parties to that contract and all deliverables for the harvest, stumpage rates, and it should also include a provision for follow-up on silviculture work. During harvest, it's important to have regular check-ins with the forest professional and contractor. You should do this at least once per week. You should not be afraid to change the plans as the harvest proceeds. Most contractors are very adaptable and accommodating, and you can end the agreement if necessary. So that's an important clause you should put into the contract while you are developing the contract, that you can end this agreement early if necessary. So reasons may be weather, or maybe the contractor is not meeting your values or your goals. Post-harvest, wood should be trucked in a timely manner, inspection to make sure all terms of the contract were followed, and you should also schedule a date for follow-up silviculture assessments. So when planning out your restoration post-harvest, it may include activities such as planting, weeding, or thinning. You should give it time. So forest takes a little while to respond to a large-scale disturbance, and a large-scale disturbance could be a harvest. So you should give the forest time to respond to that and give it time to naturally regenerate itself before you go in, do an assessment, and determine what is the best route to better regenerate your forest. The important key here is diversity. So with the Wabanaki-Acadian Forest, we have a unique forest structure where the deciduous forest of the south and the boreal forest of the north meet together. The boreal forest is far better adapted to better responding to large-scale disturbances like fire or wind damage. The species that generally grow within the boreal forest have adapted to this. For example, jack pine its cones will only open under extreme heat, or trembling aspen, which is fairly abundant within the forest. They grow readily and will create offshoots, endocormic shoots from their stumps or from their roots underground. Or balsam fir is a pretty prolific cedar, creating its seeds will be stored within the seed bed and basically wait for that time where there is that disturbance, and then you'll get a huge growth of them coming up. So it's important to wait those couple years after harvest to determine what is regenerating and what steps do you need to put in place to allow it to regenerate better or to create more diversity in what is regenerating. Adaptive silviculture. Species such as red maple, white pine, red oak, and hemlock are predicted to do well under a warming climate. These are only projections, so diversity is important, as some projections may be wrong. It is also important to understand that some of those species that are projected to do well are under other threats. So the examples Ryan provided here are the emerald ash borer, which affects the ash trees found within Nova Scotia, as well as hemlock woolly adelgid, which is severely affecting the hemlock found within Nova Scotia. When planting or considering planting, again, you should give the site time to establish natural regeneration, wait at least 2 years, and then have a regeneration survey done to assess the need for planting. A monoculture is not a forest. So a monoculture is when you have a single tree species growing up in your forest and basically taking over. I've been to a few of these within the past couple months, and what I have found is it's mostly balsam fir. You get a lot of balsam fir stands where it is even age, tightly packed balsam fir. From the stands I had been in previously, where this was the case, I found that on old harvest trails, there was evidence of tolerant and intolerant hardwoods, which provided me more of an outlook on what the history of this site was. It was likely an intolerant or mixed wood area that, after receiving treatment, grew into a balsam fir stand. My recommendation for that stand was actually a gap shelter wood with in-planting within the gaps after the treatment took place. Softwoods are easier to find and plant. Use hardwoods for enrichment planting and a future seed source. Planting and transplanting is a good low-cost activity, and most stewards can do this on their own lots. The average cost for planting a tree, similar to what you see here, this oak tree, would be about $7 with the tube and the protective shelter. Microsites are an important consideration when planting. So as shown in a previous picture with the mounded topography, it's important to plant on the side or top of those mounds and avoid depressions, as the depressions will hold water and can drown the trees that you plant. Generally, the side of a mound is the most recommended area, as the top of the mound could dry out quicker. And generally on the side is where you have a mix of the two, where you get the moisture from the bottom and it's not going to be too much for the tree to continue growing. You should also know the site requirements, the light, moisture, and nutrients for the species you are planting. Areas with a lot of grass or shrubs will require continued maintenance to ensure the survival of planted trees. Seedlings need to be planted in mineral soil. Sites with thick forest floor layer need to be scuffed down to the soil layer. So if you are planting a tree, or if you have ever witnessed people planting trees, you will generally see the terminology I would know this by is screefing, where they kick their foot against the soil to take away that duff layer, get down to the mineral soil, and that in the mineral soil is where they would plant their tree. On old field sites, it is better to plant taller or older seedlings and possibly mulch around them to keep the grass down. This will prevent further costs as well as further treatments, as the grass is pretty prolific and can outcompete the trees. Transplanting is a good activity when seedlings are dormant in early spring and late fall. Road beds and ditches are a great site to find seedlings. So this slide, don't waste silviculture money. So this is a picture of a clear cut. It was cut in the fall and then planted the following spring. The site regenerated well naturally, and even though it was planted, it is almost impossible to pick out the planted trees. They're either mixed in with the naturally regenerated softwoods or have already been outcompeted by the aspen you can see growing within the picture. So thousands of dollars were spent in planting this site with very little net benefit. If this clear cut was left to regenerate for those 2 years as recommended, and then an assessment was done, that assessment would have shown that the site is already naturally regenerating. And instead of planting, we should implement these measures to better promote those species or the diversity of the stand. So further treatment, thinning and weeding. Process of thinning a young stand to decrease the density while increasing the percent stocking of desirable species. Desirable species would likely be shade tolerant to semi-shade tolerant species that are long-lived and likely to do well in a changing climate. It's typically fully funded. Some sites may require a top-up from landowners, but there is silviculture funding through NSDNR for this type of treatment, and it sets the table for future harvests. Well-formed trees are more well-adapted for partial harvesting. This picture is actually of a site that Ryan had worked on. The focus was releasing the red spruce, you can see standing in the background here, while promoting approximately 20% hardwood species, which was mostly red maple with a few others. Most of what was cut within this site was fir, gray birch, and aspen. So this is a picture of an unmanaged stand. There's not too much you can really do in the stand. It is highly susceptible to blowdown. As you can see, there is a low live crown ratio. So a live crown ratio is how much live crown there is compared to the entire stem. You can see it is all even height with small bowl size. This is prone to wind throw, prone to fire, low diversity, and low biodiversity benefit in this type of stand. This would be an example of a managed stand. So you can see there's much better individual tree development, larger bowl size. Species composition within this picture could be better. I would actually suggest doing a harvest or treatment within this area, opening up some of the crown and allowing those areas to naturally regenerate, depending on the regeneration survey and seeing how diverse the regeneration is. Potential planting within this site may be recommended. It is also important to note that these trees pictured here are the same age as these trees pictured here. That's why it's sometimes human intervention can be key to promoting a healthier forest. There are cases where doing nothing is completely acceptable. Generally, that would be determined by the assessment done by the forest technician or forester. So the key takeaways from this presentation: take your time and have a proper assessment completed. Retention in coarse woody material, snags, and standing live trees is key for biodiversity. You should find a forest professional and contractor that share your goals and your values, and have a plan for the harvest and follow-up. Get it in writing. Thank you. I am not Ryan Dickey. So I guess we can open it up to questions. I will go through the chat here and see what's come up. So Andy had asked, how does a landowner find a forest professional who shares their values and will work to achieve? Oh, sorry, Andy, I just noticed your hand was up there. Oh, I'm not sure.
Thank you, Christy. I'm so
There we go.
sorry. Somehow we had a miscommunication and I couldn't unmute myself after deliberately doing that so as not to interrupt Daniel. Thank you so much, Daniel, for that. We have a bunch of programs we offer through NSWOA, and most of us were at a steering committee meeting for one of them that ran until most of probably 3:30 before Daniel got home. So he had all of about an hour or an hour and a half to look over what Ryan had written about and to be ready to do this this talk with you. And I think you did a great job. Thank you. We a really fun time, I think, at our organization, in that we talk a lot about this stuff and we freely disagree, and we try to use what science tells us, current science tells us, and then argue about what it means we should be doing. And I have very little that I would disagree with generally that Daniel or Ryan say, and particularly with this presentation. One thing I do need to mention is that once or twice Daniel said something about extension foresters, and we're trying to encourage greater use of forest professionals in Nova Scotia. So our folks, whether they're forest technicians or whether they're natural resource degrees or other methods of learning about how the woods work, we refer to them as extension forest professionals, not as foresters. We love those folks and we want them to succeed, and they need us not to mischaracterize who we are inadvertently. The other thing I thought when I was looking at this, and Daniel was saying something about leaving something, and it was a particularly messy looking piece of ground, was I could almost hear the audible shudder amongst many of the landowners, right? When you looked at that, and Daniel saying, maybe some of this should be left. But the point that's important here is that we're not trying to recreate a park. We're trying to recreate a diverse natural forest. And in some cases, that's been missing for a long time for some of these stands that you're looking at. We believe that over the long term, creating diverse natural forests will ensure resilience, and in fact will maximize the amount of economic, ecological, and social recreational values that landowners receive for their management of their woodlands. So we think it's a win-win-win. What else did I have for you? Diversity really is the key. I've been involved in this issue for, a really long time now, maybe 40 years, and have visited pretty much most of the old growth stands and a few never been cut stands in the eastern part of the continent. And when you get into these stands, the one thing that you generally see in the Acadian Wabanaki forest type is you see diversity, right? A bunch of Nova Scotia forest professionals and I were in Maine in 2019, and we were in Big Reed, which is the biggest never been cut stand east of the Mississippi River, as far as anyone knows. And, we saw 170-year-old white spruce. We saw ironwood that were 20 inches in diameter. We saw, things that are just, you think that, oh, they don't exist, but in fact, they used to exist. And their diversity was a hallmark of our forest type, and human intervention over centuries now has really changed that. And I think we would say, and research would generally support, that it's been to the detriment of a lot of values that formerly were associated with the Acadian forest. We will make this presentation available to you. I'm not quite sure how, but we have your email addresses and we'll let you know. Let's see, you got some planting sources from Ryan, so that was taken care of. We should say we do have we're glad to talk with you if you have specific personal questions about this that can't be addressed tonight. You're welcome to call us anytime. We have a program called Forester in a Phone. Ryan is much bigger than Daniel. He does not fit as well in the phone, so you may get Daniel, you may get Ryan. Most likely you'll get me as the smallest one of the bunch in the phone. I am not a forester, and neither are any of those, so I suppose we should come up with another name for our Forester in the Phone program too. Yeah, so let's take a look at these questions, some of which were already answered by Ryan, who, although he's quite ill, is indefatigable, as they say. Let's see. I happen to pen the first question. How does a landowner find a forest professional who shares their values and will work to achieve their goals? Daniel gave you some suggestions, but I just want to ask if he has any other questions. Once you get someone, you had very good questions to ask, but how do you find that person in the first place, Daniel? Oh, and look at that, just below, Ryan answered that several ways. What are your thoughts, Daniel?
So I would echo what Ryan had stated in the chat, that the best bet is to reach out to the associations. So there's Nova Scotia Woodlot Owner and Operators Association, as well as the Federation of Nova Scotia Woodlot Owners, or the Nova Scotia Landowner and Forest Fiber Producers Association. Our association, Family Forest Network, you can reach out to us. As Andy was mentioning, we are trying to push towards a extension forester type of thing where private woodlot owners can reach out to receive some form of direction or ask their questions to either myself or Ryan, and we can then hopefully put you in the right direction to help meet your goals or provide you with somebody who can help you reach those goals.
Yeah, thank you. Ken asked the question about where you get nursery stock, and Ryan provided a bunch of examples in the chat. I encourage you to look at that, probably easier than try to repeat it all. Bill and Ruth had to leave. That's too bad. They didn't have any sound. Let's see, what else is in the questions? Andrew Oliver had a good suggestion in Southwest Nova at TD Nursery. Heard a lot of good things about them. Thank you. And Sarah has a great question, Daniel. How do you find oh my goodness, you've typed an answer underneath it. I think that's worth talking about to the whole group. How do you find a balance between leaving woody material to retain biodiversity and not increasing the risk of forest fire? I would add that forest fires are random catastrophic events, so it would be impossible for me to promise you that the place you're sitting at right now, I see Gary Fisher right there, and I can't promise you that the piece of ground underneath his chair won't burn next week. I can tell you, however, that in the Acadian forest, the frequency of forest fires on any individual acre is very, very low. It's on the order of 900 to 3,000 years. So forest fire risk is often overstated, but it can't be predicted. And so that's where the problem comes in, right? And people are justifiably concerned, but we have to figure out how to balance that concern with the reality of a relatively low frequency, a very low frequency. So Daniel, how do people come up with that balance? You had
So there's a few important things to note here. And I would say the first thing is, if you're ever concerned about the spread of wildfire in your property or around your property, you should speak to a wildfire prevention officer, as they will be able to provide you with the most up-to-date or best preventative measures. It's also important to note, as Andy was saying, wildfires are aptly named wild because they can be unpredictable and at times break the rules that most fires follow. And by rules, I mean that there is tools that forest fire prevention officers utilize to better predict fire behavior. Those look towards relative humidity, fine moisture or fine fuel moisture content, duff layer moisture content, as well as the stand structure and forest structure, vegetation type. There's a lot that goes into trying to predict forest fires. So it's hard to, there's no one thing that will prevent a forest fire from happening. There's something called the fire triangle, which is three things that every fire needs to actually start, that being oxygen, fuel, and an ignition source. We're not getting rid of oxygen. You're not getting rid of the fuel source unless you're going to be going scorched earth and putting in a cement pad. You're always going to have some form of a fuel source. So the best thing to try to control is your ignition source. And the only way to do that is for people to put a preventative measure in themselves. So if you're out during a dry period of the year and you are out on your ATV having a grand old time, it's important to stop and check the exhaust on your ATV to make sure that there are no embers burning, you're not creating any sparks. If you're a smoker, make sure that your cigarette is put out properly and you're not leaving the butt in a potentially burnable area. As for coarse woody material left, forest wildfire prevention officers have created a document called the Fire Smart Manual. This will outline zones around your home or around structures and best preventative measures for each of those zones. So there's the non-combustible zone, which I believe is up to 1.5 meters in around your house or structure, where you should try to not have any combustibles at all. And then it expands from there and further and further. It is not recommended to try to treat a woodlot or the forest as you would your yard. And a lot of the things that are recommended within the Fire Smart Manual. So for example, it also recommends pruning the lower 2-meter branches off of the trees found within your yard. A healthy forest does these type of things themselves. A healthy forest will spread, the stems will spread themselves out as some species outcompete other species and species die off, and trees will prune themselves as they grow to larger heights. Trying to state how much coarse woody material is safe and how much isn't safe isn't something that could technically be done. I would suppose there's no definitive answer to that. There are measures that you can put in place to better prevent the spread of wildfire. So for example, if you have a large accumulation of coarse woody material, it may be best to spread that out to better prevent an area where an ember could more readily light or ignite. But it's also important to take what was discussed within this presentation and apply it. So coarse woody material, yes, it is fuel for a wildfire, but it also has a lot more value. It is nutrients for your soil. It's a habitat for wildlife. It provides a water source or seed source for wildlife. There's a lot of good things that coarse woody material does for our forest that we should never be trying to eliminate it entirely.
Thank you, Daniel. Bill Ernst has a really good question. He says he's contacted a number of forest contractors and is having a problem getting anyone to look at what's happened on his lot, 115 acres in Antigonish, around Antigonish. So I don't know, Bill, if you tried Peter Burchill over at Landowners and Forest Fiber Producers in Port Hawkesbury. Peter is a partner of ours and a reliable fellow, and may be able to point you in the right direction. Look up Cape Breton Private Land Partnership or Nova Scotia Landowner and Forest Fiber Producers Association. If you can't get anywhere with that, do give us a call and we'll help you to explore that a little farther. Yeah, that's about the best I think we can do for you at this time. I mean, there's a lot of work that some people want to do because of the hurricane. Contractors are generally cutting as much as they can. However, as we unfortunately predicted in our hurricane video of a couple of months ago, the wood yards would soon be plugged with wood, and they are, and so the whole situation is difficult now. Too much wood in the market, too many contractors tied up in too many things, and a hard situation for many small landowners. That's not to be critical of anybody. That was the predictable result of a significant catastrophe that was going to result in a lot of wood heading toward mills. Yeah, what else? Other questions? Christy will unmute you, and you can blather on just like I have been for the past little bit. If you like, just raise your hand and she'll unmute you, or at least try. Ryan, do you, while you're thinking about whether you have anything else you're interested in, Ryan, should we put you on the spot and ask you if we missed anything of importance, and then you can prove to the folks how actually ill you are, and maybe fill us in on anything we missed.
Hold on, I need to find him and unmute him.
Okay, can you do that from the chat? Because he's at the bottom of the chat right now. No voice at all. Yeah, it's even worse. Okay. Thank you, Ryan. We do appreciate your being here. As I said, if you come up with questions beyond outside of this meeting, just give us a call. The toll-free number is 855-8NS Woods, 855-NS Woods. That's 679-6637, I think. 679-6637. We will do our best to give you a hand.
There is one
yeah.
question from G. Peter Matt Q. Are folks receiving
we always want questions from him. So go ahead. What's Peter have to say?
Are folks receiving the assistance payouts in a timely manner? Fortunately,
Ryan
Peter,
I
don't have the answer for that. Ryan, maybe you do, that you could put in the chat.
Yeah, Ryan's been keeping track of that for us, and hopefully he's still there. If he is, that'll be the best answer we can give you, Peter. Anything else? I see a hand from Gary. Could we unmute Gary? We mostly trust him not to say anything outrageous. Gary's up the top, Christy. There you go.
Hi, can you hear me?
Perfect.
I was just listening to the fact there you were saying that, like the wood yards and stuff are full right now, but the contractors obviously would have still the cutting capacity. Has there been any thought giving of getting mobile debarkers going around and debarking some of this pile of wood so it retains its longevity so it could be sold at a later date?
That's a good question, Gary, and I'm not sure about that. I know there's a equipment financing program that Ryan is also the lead on it for us. So we're disadvantaged tonight in that most of the things that relate to questions around the hurricane really have been sort of managed by Ryan for us. Any input there on regularity of payments or ability to get financing under the equipment financing program, Ryan? He may have gone to bed, and I'm sorry if that's the case, but we'll get you answers. Okay, there we go. He says, not that I have heard of. I think by the time they got them, I guess he means the debarkers set up, the mills would be back open. That's
okay.
His understanding. But he says payments seem to be going pretty quickly from ASF, though, and I don't know if I don't know anything about that. ASF being the Association for Sustainable Forestry, which is managing a lot of the hurricane recovery funding. Let's see, we had something from Carol though, uprooted stumps in close proximity to dwellings and living area. What's your recommendation, Daniel? And then we'll get back to Peter.
If it is a threat to a dwelling or in close proximity to a dwelling or structure, then it should be removed. Stumps as well. Separate presentation that I'm putting together actually speaks more towards this about being fire smart. But there is an area around your home called the non-combustible zone. And then actually, I'll see if I can quickly pull it up here. It should only take me 2 seconds.
And Carol's not going to get that work done in the next 2 weeks anyway. So if you don't see it, we can invite her to sit in on the next webinar and hear all about it.
Absolutely. Let's see. Can I share my screen again?
While Dan's pulling that up, if anyone has any questions, you can go to the bottom of your screen and click on reactions, and then there's a raise hand option, and then I'll be able to see you and unmute you.
So Peter's question towards the boundary lines and blazing, you should reestablish boundary lines. And if you are unsure of where your boundary lines may be, that would be a good time to speak with a forest professional, as they can come in and do that for you.
We have a raised hand from Eve Proctor, so I'm going to unmute. Are you able to unmute yourself now, Eve?
Can you hear me?
Yep, perfect.
Yes, towards the very end of the presentation, you showed what I think was a stand of even probably fir in a clear cut, all growing very close together. And I was wondering if you would do something with that. I mean, and what would you do if you were going to try to, yes, exactly. What would you do to that if you were, trying to change it into something better?
I would have to go out and do an assessment, but just based on this picture, I would likely recommend something like a gap shelter wood and then infill planting.
So in other words, you'd create.
I would create
small
openings. Yes, I would create small openings similar to what was shown in the moderate damage photo from the hurricane. And then I would plant within those small openings.
And by small, what would the approximate size be?
1 to 2 hectares, roughly.
Yeah, I'd say we could even go smaller than that, Eve.
Yep,
the problem, of course, is people who might do this work need also to make a living. And so that's where the balancing act comes in, right? We always encourage you to stick to your guns, but sometimes your guns are either unachievable or may require some money from you. So, but yes, I mean, the natural forest gap size in the Acadian forest on average over all time periods and all forest types is around 1/4 of is it 1/4 of a hectare or 1/4 of an acre? I don't remember, but it's actually rather small. It's one tree and maybe a few others that fall out typically. I mean, of course, we have larger events. We have hurricanes, we have ice storms and a lot of other catastrophes. But typically, and you see this if you go like I do to many older stands, that forest succession happens in the Acadian forest, most commonly in very small percentages of the forest and very small areas of the forest. So 1/4 of an acre to 1/4 of a hectare, and around 1% of the forest per year turns over. So the typical forestry that happens in Nova Scotia is quite a bit outside the boundaries of what would be happening in natural stands, in change that happens without human intervention, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, thank you.
Just to speak towards the the non-combustible zones as well as the other zones for keeping your structure fire smart. So this is from the Fire Smart manual. So within 0 to 1.5 meters of your house, you should have a non-combustible zone. Hold on, let's see if this will want to work for me now. There we go. So reduce the chance of windblown embers, igniting materials near your home. Non-combustible surface should extend around the entire home and any attachments such as decks. Creating a non-combustible surface can be as easy as clearing vegetation and combustible material down to mineral soil. To add to your landscape design, use non-combustible materials such as gravel, brick, or concrete. In this critical area adjacent to your home. Woody shrubs, trees, and tree branches should be avoided in this zone. Any that are present should be properly mitigated. So that again is up to 1.5 meters around your home. From there, the Fire Smart manual extends out to other zones, zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, zone 4. Or I might have went too far, zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, and gives recommendations for what you can do within those zones as well to better prevent wildfire spreading to your structure or your home. So Ryan had provided a recommendation for the stumps. Said utilize a stump grinder. It's less invasive and it leaves the mulch on site. So you can generally rent a stump grinder at most heavy duty shops, or you can bring in somebody to do it for you, and then you can feed the stump into the grinder and you can utilize the mulch in other areas, or you can leave it in place.
Any other questions? That's great. We're around when we said we might finish up. Glad to take a few more. And if not, please do contact us at work tomorrow. One final question then from Keith Collier. What are the main risks of not having clearly defined boundary lines? Oh, that's a favorite question of mine, Keith. But go ahead, Daniel.
So if you don't have clearly defined boundary lines, basically giving a visual in the field for operators, there is always the risk that they may step outside your boundary and you trespass onto somebody else's boundary, or let's say your neighbor is having work done and they may trespass onto your boundary. That has its own ramifications in itself. But it's always good to speak with your neighbors and set those boundaries. And I believe Ryan spoke to it in the chat, that you can have a surveyor come and survey your boundaries. And if you speak with your neighbors, as it is a joining boundary between your two properties, you may be able to share that cost.
Yeah, we're going to have a real problem here because boundary line work, for places where boundaries have been entirely wiped out, resurveys are very expensive. That's why you encourage people to keep their boundaries in mind and to keep them up. And we actually offer a boundary line course every year at Otter Ponds Demonstration Forest, which tells you how to do that. May save you tens of thousands of dollars, what you can do and what you can't do, right? And well worth attending the next time you see one publicized. One more question. That was a good one. Maybe we'll get one other that missed something really important. All right, then. I think we're there. Thank you so much for attending tonight. I think it came off pretty well, given the quick stick handling by Daniel. And who also is celebrating a birthday. Wait a minute, there's three new things. So yes, right, and it's offered through Otter Ponds Demonstration Forest. You have a place Christy will put it in chat where you can sign up for information about future seminars and workshops and field events that we'll be doing. It's really worth your time. We don't send out that many emails. You won't get deluged, and you may find a number of things that you really might find interesting. So could you just stick that in chat, Christy? Yeah, meanwhile, pretty good, I think, performance tonight by our very own birthday boy, Daniel Hart. Happy birthday, Daniel.
Thanks, Andy. And thank you, Ryan, for putting the presentation together. Hopefully I did it justice.
I think Ryan has finally passed out on the couch, so I think you did, Daniel. And good night, all. Feel free to give me a call again, 1-855-NS-WOODS. Good night, all.
Thank you.